My dad left mom for her friend, hid $400,000 in assets, and tried to screw us in court. Years later, I gave him what he deserved. Hey everyone! Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. Hey Reddit, long-time lurker, first-time poster. This whole disaster started when I was 17, right before senior year. My dad threw away our family for my mom's friend, hid money from us, and tried to ruin our lives. Here's how everything went down. I, 31 male, grew up in suburban Michigan, just outside Detroit. I'm the middle child between my older brother Ethan, 33 male, and younger sister Zoe, 28 female. Dad worked as a district sales manager for a medical equipment company. Decent money, but nothing extraordinary. Mom was an elementary school librarian who somehow managed to keep our household running while raising 3 kids on what was essentially 1.5 incomes. She was the family glue, handling everything from grocery shopping to homework help, while Dad was networking with clients. Our life wasn't anything special, but it was stable. Family vacations were road trips to Wisconsin Dells or renting a cabin up north, not the European cruises Dad's boss took every summer. We drove practical cars that lasted until they died. Dad always talked about upgrading to a Lexus next year, but somehow next year never came. He'd bring home luxury car brochures and leave them conspicuously on the kitchen counter, as if staring at them long enough would magically make them affordable. Dad had this monthly poker game at our house, with guys from his company in college, 5 or 6 dudes who'd come over, lose money to each other, and complain about their wives. The regulars included Kevin, VP at Dad's company, his wife Patricia, Mom's friend, and Scott, Dad's best friend since their frat days, who now worked in commercial development. Scott was the perpetual bachelor with no responsibilities beyond his thriving commercial real estate business. While Dad was stuck discussing public school lunch programs at dinner, Scott was jetting off to Vegas or buying another investment property. Scott had built up a small commercial real estate portfolio in his 30s that was now paying off handsomely in his late 40s, letting him semi-retire while still making bank. He'd show up to poker night in a different German car every few months, casually mentioning how he'd gotten a deal through some client. Patricia was something else entirely. Late 40s, but dressed and acted like she was trying to get cast on Real Housewives. Those obvious cosmetic procedures that looked fine in Instagram filters, but uncanny valley in person. She'd arrive at our house for poker night in full makeup, checking her reflection in every reflective surface she passed. Patricia was always decked out in designer everything with logos you could see from space. Whenever she came over, she'd immediately start evaluating our house, touching furniture, and asking mom-pointed questions like, "Have you ever thought about updating these countertops? Laminate is so practical." Rumor had it Kevin had married her for her family connections that helped land him the VP position. He was a quiet, strategic guy who'd climbed the corporate ladder while Patricia worked on climbing the social one. He'd make these subtle, apologetic glances to my mom whenever Patricia said something particularly condescending. Now I think Kevin knew something was off between Patricia and my dad. He just didn't want to admit it out loud. Mom would just smile and find some excuse to check on dinner. She wasn't confrontational, something Patricia clearly saw as weakness she could exploit. Mom was the type who'd rather avoid conflict than cause a scene, a trait that served her well in a school library full of rowdy kids but left her vulnerable to social predators like Patricia, who feed on perceived weakness. My Aunt Jen moved in with us during my junior year of high school after her divorce. She was Mom's younger sister by 5 years. Blunt, unapologetic, with a sharp legal mind from her career as a paralegal at one of Detroit's top firms. She rode a Harley on weekends, had a concealed carry permit, and was the living embodiment of zero F to give. The first time Patricia tried her usual passive-aggressive comments with Aunt Jen present, Jen just stared at her until Patricia physically backed up a step. It was like watching a house cat suddenly realize it was in the presence of a panther. Dad hated having her around, claimed she was a bad influence on Mom. I understand now why. She was the only one who saw through his bullshit right from the start. She'd caught him flirting with a cocktail waitress at a company Christmas party 2 years earlier and never trusted him again. Dad would make these little digs at her living situation, asking when she was getting back on her feet, despite her having a better-paying job than him. Dad and Patricia's thing wasn't exactly subtle. At neighborhood cookouts, they'd both conveniently need to check something in the garage or grab more ice and disappear for 15 minutes or The first time it happened, I thought it was weird but didn't connect the dots. By the fifth time, even I had figured it out. And I was a clueless teenager. Mom seemed oblivious, but looking back, I think she was just in deep denial. I'd catch her watching Dad with this distant look sometimes, like she was trying to solve a math problem with missing variables. I heard her crying in the bathroom once after a neighborhood party, where Patricia had been particularly handsy with Dad, but when she came out, she acted like nothing was wrong. Scott wasn't oblivious, though. I caught him watching them once with this disgusted look before he noticed me and quickly changed the subject. He'd later tell me he'd tried warning Dad off twice, but Dad had laughed it off as harmless fun. That was Dad's MO. Minimize, deflect, deny. I was 2 months away from senior year, focused on college applications and maintaining my GPA, when our normal, boring suburban life imploded, and none of us were prepared for the nuclear fallout. The text messages weren't discovered by accident. This wasn't some movie scene where Mom borrows Dad's phone to check the weather and discovers his affair. Aunt Jen had been watching Dad's behavior for months. Finally, she convinced Mom to check his phone. They waited until Dad was in the shower one Sunday morning, grabbed his unlocked phone, the genius used his birthday as his passcode, and went through his messages while Ethan and I were at baseball practice. They found hundreds of messages between him and Patricia, going back almost a year. Not just casual sexting, but full relationship-level communication, plans for their future, complaints about their current lives. The texts made it clear they'd been sleeping together while Kevin was at sales meetings, and Dad had been trash-talking Mom's appearance and our family budget. Dad had sent detailed breakdowns of our family finances to Patricia, complaining about how much my braces cost, how Zoe's dance lessons were draining him, and how Ethan's college tuition was robbing him of his retirement. In one message, he'd told Patricia that Mom's librarian's salary was pathetic and that he was embarrassed when people asked what his wife did for work. This coming from the guy who'd encouraged Mom to take that job because the hours matched our school schedule. Mom didn't scream or throw plates like in the movies. She just methodically took screenshots of everything, sent them to her email, and called a lawyer the next morning. Aunt Jen got her in with Catherine Schultz, one of the top divorce attorneys in the state. Ms. Schultz was legendary in Michigan legal circles. She had a reputation for absolutely destroying cheating husbands in court. Her office walls were covered with thank you letters from women she'd represented. Jen had worked with her on 3 previous cases and knew she was worth the $400 per hour retainer. When Mom finally confronted Dad 3 days later, he pulled every gaslighting trick imaginable. I was in the kitchen, supposedly doing homework, but actually listening to every word through the thin walls of our dining room. You're being paranoid. Patricia's just a friend from work. Those messages don't mean what you think they mean. This is what happens when your sister puts ideas in your head. When Mom showed him the screenshots, he went from defensive to calculating in seconds. His voice changed from high-pitched innocence to low, threatening calm. You accessed my private phone? That's an invasion of privacy. Mom just stared at him coldly. And I can sue you for breaking the fidelity clause in our prenup. Your choice. I didn't even know they had a prenup. Turns out Mom's grandmother had left her a small inheritance, and her parents had insisted on protecting it before the wedding. Dad had signed it without much thought since Mom had no real assets at the time. That prenup would turn out to be his undoing. Dad moved out that night. As he packed, he kept trying different angles. Guilt trips about how we'd destroy the kids by breaking up the family. Veiled threats about finances. 2 days later, we found out through a neighbor that he'd moved straight into Patricia's McMansion in the expensive subdivision across town. Scott came by the house the day after Dad left. He stood awkwardly in our kitchen, shifting his weight from foot to foot like he was afraid the floor might collapse under him. Look, Alex, your dad is making a huge mistake here. I tried talking sense into him, but he handed Mom an envelope. This isn't charity. It's an advance on what he owes you until the legal stuff gets sorted. Mom tried to refuse, but Scott insisted. I've known your husband 20 years. I know how he operates. He's already moved money around. Consider this a loan until your lawyer catches up to his bullshit. Mom broke down after he left, the first real emotion I'd seen from her since finding the texts. The envelope contained enough to cover 2 months of mortgage payments and groceries while the legal system caught up to Dad's financial games. I later found out Scott had been watching Dad's financial moves for months, noting how he'd been gradually transferring funds to private accounts, lending money to shell companies, and setting up a financial escape route. Scott had played dumb during those transactions, even helping Dad set up some of the accounts, all while keeping detailed records he'd later provide to Mom's lawyer. Dad's first move was cutting access to all joint accounts. Not just credit cards, but checking, savings. Even the college fund accounts he'd promised were in our names, but had actually kept in his. The day after moving out, he called the banks, changed all passwords, and essentially financially stranded Mom with 3 kids and a mortgage. His second move was filing for full custody of Zoe, who was 14 at the time, claiming Mom was emotionally unstable and financially irresponsible. This wasn't because he actually wanted custody, it was strategic, a bargaining chip to reduce child support and alimony. Dad knew Mom would do anything to keep Zoe, including accept less money. The initial judge assigned to our case, Judge Pearson, was some country club buddy of Dad's lawyer, and granted a temporary order, giving Dad weekend visitation, despite Mom having been our primary caregiver our entire lives. We later found out Dad and his lawyer had donated to Pearson's re-election campaign the previous year. In Michigan's county-level judicial elections, $5,000 buys a lot of favorable rulings. The custody evaluator assigned to our case was Dr. Friedman. He wrote in his initial report that we'd been coached by our mother to reject our father. Complete bullshit that ignored the fact that we'd all seen the text messages ourselves. Ethan, who was already at Michigan State, drove 4 hours home to attend his interview with Friedman, only to have the doctor dismiss everything he said as second-hand information, even though Ethan had been home during several incidents. Dr. Friedman wrote in his report that Ethan showed clear signs of parental alienation because he referred to text messages he'd seen himself. I later found out through Aunt Jen's legal connections that Dr. Friedman had been reprimanded twice by the state psychology board for showing bias in custody evaluations, but the information was buried in confidential disciplinary records that most attorneys never checked. Ms. Schultz immediately filed a motion to have him removed from our case once she learned this. Patricia played her part perfectly during this phase, the concerned stepmother-to-be. She'd show up to court in conservative blazers with minimal makeup, hair pulled back, looking like a PTA president. The act worked on Dr. Friedman, who quoted her extensively in his report about Mom's concerning behavior. Dad had given her a script about Mom's drinking problem, completely fabricated, and Patricia performed it flawlessly, with fake concern in her eyes as she described Mom's deterioration. But at Patricia's house, the mask came off. She'd criticize everything Zoe did, how she loaded the dishwasher, how she folded towels, even how she breathed too loudly when watching TV. She'd make my sister redo chores 3 or 4 times until they met her standards. One time, Zoe accidentally used Patricia's special face wash, and Patricia lost her shit, screaming that it cost more than Zoe's entire wardrobe. She'd say things like, "No wonder your father needed an escape from your family," when Zoe or I did anything that annoyed her. She reorganized Zoe's entire closet, throwing out cheap clothes and replacing them with designer items, on Dad's dime, of course, that were always slightly too small, then criticizing Zoe's weight when she couldn't wear them comfortably. The financial discovery phase was when Dad's house of cards started wobbling. He initially claimed he only made $85,000 base salary with minimal commissions, providing tax returns and pay stubs as evidence. What he didn't count on was Aunt Jen's experience with financial fraud cases and Ms. Schultz's network of forensic accountants. They dug deeper, eventually uncovering an offshore account in the Caymans, where Dad had been filtering sales commissions for years. The account was under a shell company called Alpha Medical Consulting, a fake business Dad had created to launder what turned out to be over 40% of his actual income. They also found emails showing he'd been planning this divorce for at least 18 months, transferring assets, establishing separate accounts, and even researching states with more favorable divorce laws for men. There were emails to a financial advisor from 2 years earlier asking about protecting assets in case of a separation and minimizing alimony exposure. Dad had been systematically hiding income for years, having clients pay consulting fees to his shell company, reporting only his base salary on taxes, and building a secret financial cushion nobody knew about. He'd been living like he made $85,000 while actually pulling in closer to $200,000 annually. Scott became our unexpected ally during this phase. After watching Dad's performance in the first hearing, he approached Ms. Schultz with documentation of Dad's actual income, copies of commission statements, tax records Dad had shown him when they were considering investing in a rental property together, even recordings of Dad bragging at poker nights about hiding money from the IRS and Sharon. He'd started secretly recording the poker games after suspecting what Dad was up to, knowing Dad's tendency to brag when drinking. In Michigan, one-party consent for recordings is legal, so everything Scott captured was admissible. He had clips of Dad laughing about how Sharon thinks I made 85 grand last year, while discussing a boat he was planning to buy with his real money. "Why are you doing this?" I asked Scott when he came by with another envelope of documents. He looked uncomfortable. Your dad's not the guy I thought he was. I've known your mom for 20 years too, and what he's doing to her, it's not right. There was more to it, though. Scott had attended our high school graduations, helped me fix my first car, and taught Ethan how to play poker. He'd been more of a constant in our lives than many of our blood relatives. He'd helped Dad set up the shell company, thinking it was just about reducing tax liability, not screwing over his family. Later, I found out the real reason for his loyalty. He'd been in love with Mom back in college before she met Dad. They dated briefly freshman year before Mom met Dad at a campus mixer. Scott had never acted on those feelings after they broke up, but he'd never forgotten her either. Ms. Schultz filed a motion showing discrepancies between Dad's reported and actual income. The judge ordered a full forensic accounting of Dad's finances. Dad's lawyer tried blocking it, but the initial findings were damning enough that the judge threatened contempt charges if Dad didn't comply. The forensic accountant discovered Dad had been filtering nearly 40% of his income through shell companies for years, not just since planning the divorce. There were regular transfers to offshore accounts, consulting fees, paid directly by clients to avoid company commission structures, and systematic underreporting of earnings. Most damning was a second phone we didn't know existed, a burner Dad used exclusively for his side business dealings and his communications with Patricia, before they got sloppy and started using his regular phone. The burner was registered to Alpha Medical Consulting and was paid for with company funds, another financial impropriety that would later come back to haunt him when his employer found out. Meanwhile, Patricia ramped up her psychological warfare during our mandatory weekends at their house. She'd make these subtle digs about Mom, asking if she was dating yet, or commenting on our clothes. Your mother still shops at Kohl's? How economical. The way she said it made it sound like Mom was dressing us in garbage bags. She'd accidentally leave her credit card statements out showing $5,000 shopping sprees while complaining about having to feed an extra teenager on the weekends. She'd make elaborate meals when her friends came over, but serve us frozen lasagna, claiming Zoe was too picky to appreciate real food. Once, she hosted a dinner party during our weekend visit and made us eat in the kitchen while she entertained in the dining room, introducing us as Kevin's stepchildren when guests spotted us. When one guest asked if I was Dad's son, Patricia quickly interjected that I was from Richard's previous life, like Dad had been a spy or convict rather than married to Mom for 20-plus years. Patricia was obsessed with appearances. She'd take hundreds of selfies before choosing one to post, rearrange decorative pillows if they were slightly askew, and once made Zoe change clothes before going to the grocery store because her outfit didn't coordinate with the car's interior. I wish I was making this up. She'd schedule her personal trainer during our visits and parade around in expensive workout gear, making sure we saw the $200 price tags she forgot to remove. She'd do these ostentatious stretches in the kitchen while I was eating breakfast, talking loudly on speakerphone to her friends about their upcoming spa weekend. Dad was barely present during these visits, always working, golfing, or at client dinners that conveniently kept him away from the house most of the weekend. The few times he was there, he'd hide in his home office, coming out only to ask if we were behaving ourselves or to criticize something we'd done. Even when we tried telling him what was happening with Patricia, he'd brush it off. Patricia wouldn't say that, he'd dismiss, like her word was somehow more reliable than his own kids. He'd bought a new Lexus within weeks of moving out, the car he could never afford while supporting us, apparently. 8 months into the divorce, Dad's carefully constructed facade started crumbling. The forensic accountant found evidence of at least $430,000 in hidden income over 3 years. Mrs. Schultz filed a formal motion to have Dr. Friedman dismissed for demonstrable bias, which the judge approved after reviewing his disciplinary record. A new evaluator was assigned, Dr. Martinez, who actually listened to us instead of writing us off as manipulated kids. Dr. Martinez interviewed Zoe's teachers, who confirmed she'd been a happy, well-adjusted student before the divorce began, contradicting Dad's narrative of Mom's damaging parenting. She also noted the suspicious timing of Dad's sudden concern for Zoe's well-being, right when custody would affect his financial obligations. Dad's response wasn't to back down, but to escalate. He started recording all interactions with Mom, trying to provoke her into saying something he could use in court. He'd show up unannounced at my football games, cause a scene with the coaches about wanting to videotape from the sidelines, then film Mom's reaction when she asked him to leave the restricted area. When that didn't work, he tried bribing us. Promises of cars when we turned 18, spring break trips to Cancun, even hinting at paying for whatever colleges we wanted regardless of cost. Think about your future, Alex, he'd say, dangling car brochures in front of me like I was a toddler distracted by shiny objects. Your mom can't provide what I can. What he didn't understand was that we'd all seen the texts. We knew exactly what he thought of us. Financial burdens he was trying to escape. Patricia's mask slipped too. During one weekend visit, Zoe mentioned Mom had started taking night classes to get her master's degree in library science. Patricia slammed her glass down so hard it shattered. Your mother is wasting her time. No degree will fix her fundamental problems. When Zoe defended Mom, Patricia grabbed her arm hard enough to leave finger-shaped bruises. In this house, we don't talk back to adults. Mom took pictures and logged the incident for the custody file, but at the time, no one from CPS followed up. Our theory was that Dad's lawyer had connections in the department, something that seemed confirmed when the initial report mysteriously disappeared from the system. Aunt Jen found out through her legal connections that Dad's lawyer played golf weekly with the head of the local CPS office. In a county where everyone in power knew everyone else, those connections mattered more than actual evidence. The system was stacked against us in ways I was only beginning to understand. The worst incident happened 4 months before the final custody hearing. Dad had been drinking heavily, something that had become his new normal. His perfect image was cracking as the case dragged on, and more financial improprieties came to light. The medical equipment company had started an internal audit after being contacted by the divorce court, and Dad was facing questions at work about discrepancies in his client accounts. Several clients had been contacted by the forensic accountant and confirmed they'd paid consulting fees directly to Dad's shell company, payments that should have gone through proper company channels with appropriate commissions split. Patricia made some comment about Mom's new haircut, which Zoe had shown them pictures of. Dad laughed and called Mom a desperate middle-aged cliché trying to look desirable again. Zoe, who was usually quiet during these weekends, finally snapped, "At least Mom's not sleeping with someone else's husband." Dad lunged across the table and grabbed Zoe's wrist so hard she cried out, "You don't talk about Patricia that way in her house." I stepped between them, shoving Dad back hard enough that he stumbled. "Touch her again and see what happens." At 17, I was already taller than him and had been working out daily, channeling my rage into bench presses and deadlifts. Dad backed down, muttering about ungrateful brats as he retreated to the garage where he kept his drinks. I managed to record some of these incidents on my phone, not always clearly, but enough to prove what was happening when we told Mom. I'd bought a second phone specifically for this purpose, a cheap burner I kept hidden in my jacket, ready to record at the first sign of trouble. Dad and Patricia never suspected that the polite, quiet kid was documenting everything. The judge issued a temporary restraining order after reviewing the recordings. Our weekend visits were suspended pending investigation. Dad was ordered to complete anger management and alcohol assessment. Rather than comply, Dad went nuclear. He started a smear campaign against Mom and their social circle, claiming she was alienating us and making false accusations. He convinced several mutual friends to provide affidavits about Mom's unstable behavior over the years. We lost friends we'd known since kindergarten, whose parents suddenly stopped inviting us to parties or responding to texts. Mom was removed from the PTA board after rumors about drug use started circulating. Completely fabricated bullshit from Dad's allies. But Scott countered with his own affidavit, detailing years of Dad's comments about manipulating Mom, hiding assets, and the affair with Patricia that had apparently started years earlier than we thought. Scott produced emails from 5 years back showing Dad and Patricia arranging business meetings at hotels during company retreats, using Scott's loyalty and silence as cover. The final straw was when Dad violated the restraining order by showing up at our house at 1 a.m., pounding on the door and screaming that Mom had ruined his life. The police were called. Dad was arrested for violating the order, public intoxication, and resisting arrest when he took a swing at one of the officers. The dashcam footage showed him ranting about how we'd turned on him after everything he'd done for us, slurring his words as the officers cuffed him. I watched the footage during a court hearing, seeing my father, once the epitome of suburban respectability, reduced to a belligerent drunk being shoved into the back of a police car. The arrest changed everything. Dad was released on bail, but ordered to wear an ankle monitor. His company put him on administrative leave pending the outcome of their internal investigation into his financial improprieties. Patricia, seeing her meal ticket starting to crumble, began distancing herself. Our neighbors reported seeing her with different men when Dad was at work, and her social media showed her suddenly reconnecting with old flames, laying groundwork for her next move. She'd started wearing more revealing clothing to her country club, networking aggressively with recently divorced executives and widowed doctors. Our final custody hearing was scheduled for August, 3 weeks before Aunt Jen came home looking like she'd seen a ghost. "You won't believe who came to the firm today," she told Mom. "Patricia." Turns out Patricia had consulted with a divorce attorney at Jen's firm. While Jen couldn't share details due to confidentiality, the fact itself was all we needed to know. Patricia was already planning her exit strategy, seeing the writing on the wall as Dad's case crumbled and his career imploded. The week before our hearing, Scott called. He'd met Dad for lunch, trying one last time to talk sense into him. The meeting hadn't gone well. Dad had been drinking since 11 a.m. and spent most of lunch ranting about conspiracies against him. Patricia's already moved on, Scott told Mom. She's been seeing some plastic surgeon from her country club. Your husband is completely falling apart. Scott had photos on his phone showing Patricia with her new target at a restaurant in the next town over, holding hands across the table while Dad was at a court-mandated psychiatric evaluation. The surgeon, Dr. Williams, was well known for his work on Patricia's face and apparently had moved from her face to the rest of her body. Dad showed up to the final hearing looking like absolute garbage. Patricia was conspicuously absent. Dad's lawyer requested a continuance, which the judge denied after seeing the restraining order violation report. Dad's legal team was on their third lawyer. The first two had withdrawn after the financial discrepancies made their positions untenable. His current attorney was a bottom feeder who specialized in defending drunk drivers and took the case because Dad paid cash up front. Dr. Martinez's custody evaluation was devastating to Dad's case. She documented the pattern of emotional manipulation, inappropriate comments, and the incident with Zoe. She recommended full custody to Mom with supervised visitation for Dad after completion of anger management and alcohol treatment programs. She also noted Dad's concerning pattern of financial manipulation and how it indicated a deep-seated willingness to harm his family for personal gain. She highlighted how his lifestyle had immediately improved after leaving us while claiming poverty in court. The financial settlement was equally decisive. Dad was ordered to pay substantial child support based on his actual income, not the reduced figure he'd claimed. The judge also awarded Mom the house, 60% of the discovered assets, and full attorney's fees. The judge's opinion specifically cited Dad's systematic and calculated attempts to defraud both the court and his family as justification for the unusually strong ruling. He ordered Dad to pay $175,000 in back child support based on his actual income over the previous 3 years, and mandated that future payments be garnished directly from his paychecks. As we left the courthouse, Dad approached us in the parking lot. Scott stepped between us, but Dad wasn't aggressive, just pathetic. "This isn't over," he said, but the threat sounded as empty as his bank accounts were about to be. There was yellow in the whites of his eyes that hadn't been there 6 months earlier, the first visible signs of his liver failing from the constant drinking. 2 weeks later, we learned Patricia had officially filed for divorce and moved in with her surgeon. She'd emptied their joint accounts first, using the same playbook Dad had used on Mom. She'd taken the artwork, the good furniture, even the lease on Dad's Lexus, leaving him with a bare apartment and mounting legal bills. The medical equipment company's internal audit had expanded, and rumors were circulating that criminal charges might follow. Several clients had come forward reporting Dad had offered them kickbacks for directing business to specific vendors, another layer of corruption beyond what we'd already discovered. When Scott came by with the news, he brought an unexpected visitor, Kevin, Patricia's soon-to-be ex-husband. "I should have warned you years ago," Kevin said to Mom. "Patricia did the exact same thing to my first wife. It's her pattern. Find a married man, wreck his home, squeeze him dry, then move on to the next target." Kevin had finally seen through Patricia's manipulations after 20 years. He'd checked their financials after hearing about Dad's offshore accounts and discovered Patricia had been siphoning money for years into private accounts. The VP position that Dad had envied was now at risk as Kevin's involvement with the company's internal investigation became complicated by his wife's relationship with Dad. The board was concerned about the appearance of impropriety, even though Kevin had been unaware of the financial fraud. 3 years passed. Mom flourished, finished her master's degree, got promoted to district media coordinator for the entire school system, and eventually started dating a decent guy who coached Little League and treated her with respect. She used her portion of the settlement to remodel the kitchen, replacing the laminate countertops Patricia had mocked with quartz, updating the appliances, and creating the cooking space she'd always wanted. Every time I visited, she looked younger and more relaxed. Meanwhile, Dad's life imploded. After Patricia left, he lost their McMansion to foreclosure. His drinking got worse, and his company finally fired him after he showed up drunk to a client presentation. He avoided criminal charges only because the company didn't want the negative publicity of prosecuting a former sales star. He moved into a shitty one-bedroom apartment and worked selling insurance by phone instead of medical equipment to corporate clients. The medical equipment company had filed a civil suit against him for misappropriation of funds, and he'd narrowly avoided criminal charges by agreeing to a settlement that drained what remained of his savings. Patricia's karma caught up with her too. She married her plastic surgeon, but it lasted barely 8 months. According to Scott, who somehow kept tabs on everyone, she'd already moved on to a wealthy investor in Chicago. The surgeon had caught her copying his patient records, apparently looking for other wealthy potential targets. The medical board investigation that followed had damaged the surgeon's practice, and he'd cut her loose with a brutal prenup that left her with almost nothing. But karma wasn't done with her yet. The surgeon kicked her out after catching her sexting with multiple men. She tried moving in with the Chicago guy, but it turned out wealthy investor meant drowning in debt with good credit. She eventually had to take a job selling makeup at the same mall where she used to drop thousands every weekend. Former country club friends cut her off as her social capital evaporated, along with her financial resources. She started showing up to networking events in progressively less expensive clothing, trying to land another wealthy man. But the word had spread about her history. I'd graduated college and landed a job at a tech firm making serious money. I developed a software platform for medical equipment tracking that several hospitals adopted, and by 27, I'd sold my startup to a healthcare company for enough money to buy a nice house and set up solid investments. That's when the messages started coming. First from Patricia, of all people. Alex, I've been thinking about you and your siblings lately. I hope there are no hard feelings about the past. It would be lovely to reconnect. I knew exactly what that meant. Her social media showed her downward spiral. 2 days later, Dad called. Son, I've been doing a lot of thinking. I'm 9 months sober now. Really turned things around. Saw your success in the business journal. So proud of you. I let him ramble on, talking about his recovery and how he was rebuilding his life one day at a time. What he really meant was he needed money. His medical insurance had lapsed, and he'd been diagnosed with early cirrhosis. The constant drinking had finally caught up with him. Scott called to congratulate me on the company sale. There's something you should know, he said. Your dad and Patricia have been reaching out to everyone from the old days, looking for connections to you. They've heard about your success. Scott got a kick out of the plan when I told him. I decided to set up a little surprise. I invited them both to the same restaurant on the same night, telling each I wanted to meet privately. I made reservations at adjacent tables with staggered arrival times so they'd inevitably run into each other. I chose the restaurant carefully, the same upscale place where Dad had once taken Patricia while telling Mom he was working late. The look on their faces when they realized what I'd done was worth every penny of that dinner. Dad had aged 20 years in the last 10, still wearing the same sport coat he'd had during the divorce. Patricia's designer clothes had been replaced with fast fashion knockoffs. Her plastic surgery maintenance clearly lapsed. I'm confused, Patricia started. I thought this was a private dinner to discuss. A business opportunity? I finished for her. Or was it to reconnect with family in Dad's case? I slid 2 folders across the table. Inside each was a complete dossier. Bank statements, medical records, employment history, current addresses. Everything you could legally obtain with enough money and the right investigators. I've been tracking your situations. Dad's medical bills, Patricia's housing problems. I could help. I certainly have the means to. But I've made my decision not to. Dad's hands shook as he closed his folder, while Patricia kept glancing at the exit, calculating her next move. How did you... Dad started. Money finds money, I said. And desperation leaves a trail. I stood up. You taught me something. Family's conditional. Loyalty's transactional. Karma's too damn slow. I dropped 100 on the table for the untouched food. Dinner's paid for. Enjoy catching up on old times. You have a lot in common now. 2 months later, I received notice that Dad had been admitted to the hospital with complications from his liver condition. All 3 of us kids went, more out of curiosity than concern. I know I don't deserve it, he rasped, but I need help. The insurance won't cover everything. I leaned in close. Remember when Zoe needed braces and you said your bonus hadn't come through yet? Or when Mom needed that surgery and you claimed the insurance had denied it? Turns out you'd already moved that money to Patricia's account. Scott called me a month later. You're a cold bastard, he said, but I could hear the reluctant approval in his voice. I learned from the best, I replied. Not my dad, you. You showed me loyalty matters more than blood. Mom got remarried last spring to that little league coach. Ethan and I split the cost of sending them on an actual European vacation, the one Dad had always promised but never delivered. Zoe's finishing college on a scholarship and my startup fund. Some would call what I did to Dad and Patricia revenge. I just call it consequences. They made their choices, and now they're living with them.